Now we're going to get into the downswing. So there are a couple of things that are very simple here. Players that tend to have what we would call a closed torso, so their thorax torso hasn't rotated very much, tend to be in side bend, are going to have their chest close to the target. That's actually advantageous if you want to draw the ball. Tough part is it can be hard to match the club face. But the nice thing about the smart tiles is we can look at pelvic rotation, pelvic side bend. So the more side bend you have, so trail side lower than lead side, front side higher, now that's going to make it easier to influence the direction to the right, especially if you don't have much torso rotation. Alternatively, if you're somebody that likes to fade the ball, and we see this a lot with the athletic players now that are playing, the Dustin Johnsons of the world, they rotate fantastically, and obviously rotation is a big correlator to rotational velocities in the kinematic sequence. So they tend to be a little bit more rotated and they tend to be a little bit more flexed, but they're definitely facing more towards the target. Their side bend, they're in a nice position here so that they can influence the direction of the club, but very much rotated and a little bit more flexed. That's important for them to get the club on the target. So if we're going to look at a draw first. First thing we're going to do is see where Brian is, and then we'll also obviously look at the wrist angles a little bit. For the draw, we're going to see where the club is, and then for a fade. So first thing we want to look at is influencing the downswing. So we're going to exaggerate here. So this time what I want you to do, Brian, for the folks, just to exaggerate here, is try not to rotate a whole lot and let's have some side bend. Through impact, yeah. And that should start the ball to the right, a little bit more draw biased. Obviously the danger of this, if you have a lot of posterior tilt, a lot of pelvic tilt here, the problem you might get is you might start early extending. That can put problems on the back. But from a shot shaping standpoint, I think it's quite powerful to see how the influence of side bend and rotation affects the club path and the ball, ability to draw the ball. So go ahead, set up. So I want you to really exaggerate on the downswing, more side bend, not as much rotation. And that's going to allow you then to get the pass to the right. We'll probably see some high club path numbers on the launch monitor here. So we've hit that shot, and obviously that's very much in the draw dynamic. So if we look at here, a couple of things. Side bend, pelvic rotation, torso rotation. Obviously, lots of torso side bend at impact, which is what we want. The keys though here for the start line to the right is torso rotation's only about 22 degrees and the pelvic rotation's only about 28 degrees. So we're looking for that high 30s into 40s for the pelvis to rotate. We're also looking for around 35 degrees with that torso if we're trying to look at players who rotate on the higher side, which is what we'd want for more of that sort of fade type body action, very rotary pivot. This is more indicative of somebody that is going to draw the ball. And the general population doesn't tend to rotate very well. They have that thoracic and pelvic limitations when it comes to both disassociation and rotation. So you're going to see a lot more of that. That's where you've pushed that person towards more of a draw. And we see that with their smart tiles, the paths out to the right, the club face. So that's going to also make it harder to deal off the club and do some of those things that we need to control the club for our perfect delivery. But we can train that with the wrist. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to do the complete opposite. We're going to try and create more of a fade start left, and the focus is now going to be a little bit more on making sure that we're rotated, kind of more in our posture, we're turning, we're trying to make sure we have some trail side tilt with our pelvis. That's important, but we do want to rotate as hard as we can. If we get too much trail side tilt, now we're going to get stuck, can't get it to the left. But if we get a too high a right hip, now we might overdo it. So actually what we'll do, we'll exaggerate the other way. We're going to get real high right hip, no side bend, a lot of rotation, real flat fade type delivery. There we go. And now you can train a little bit how the pivot's going to move in the downswing. So if you are one of those golfers that we just had that has a lot of this, now we're going to make you work very level and rotated to try and shift that path to the left, get you rotated and clearing through the shot. So let's exaggerate that, really focus, and then we'll make some smart tiles on it, see what the club delivery is. There we go. All right, so here we have the data, and obviously very, very different again. But golf is all about blending pieces. You're trying to match what somebody does in the downswing with what they do in the backswing. For here, if we talk about trying to create speed, we want that rotation. But if you want to make sure that you have a shot that's pretty straight or even a draw, you'd need enough turn in the backswing and enough tilt, flex in the torso to influence it so that if you rotated hard like Brian did here, you'd have the right relationship. So definitely cleared his pelvis, 42 degrees, that's great. He lost that side bend, hips higher. Torso rotation, 21, so he's getting that up there, and he's got less side bend. So he's definitely more like this. He's about 9 degrees less side bend. He's rotated more, so he's now getting that club path to the left. Negative, that's the other side of the target. So if you're coaching someone and they're really struggling, they've got the big hooks, the pivot's the power and the engine for that. So the key is to try and make sure that you get them to understand the more they're rotated, when they're flexed, they tend to stay in their posture a little bit more, a little less extension. That allows them to get that swing direction, that club path, more to the left, more outside in, which is great. And we saw that here. Now, if here, the club face angle, one of the things we could work on with the wrists for that is we could add a little bit more radial, a little bit more hinge on the downswing, maintaining a little bit more lag, less throw, so that Brian would get the sensation of keeping the club face open to the path as he's delivering that very rotary pivot. It's a way for us to train it with the smart tile. So Brian, what I want you to do now, we're going to change one of the variables here. We're going to change that rotation. We're going to go to impact. We're going to go to the wrist. And we're going to go to, let's go to deviation. And so I want you to imagine that the wrist is a little bit more deviated at impact. So a little bit more hinged, right? So I want it to be hinged up. So not deviated, which would be down, but I want you to be a little bit hinged up. So that's radial deviation or hinge. I want you to keep a little more of that hinged, keep that club face as you rotate through, a little bit more of the lag feel. That's going to help him keep that face to path open, and then once we get a smart tile for that, we can train it. So let's go ahead. This time we're going to really focus the rotation, everything staying the same, but try and keep that wrist hinged. A little bit heavy there. So we've changed his low point there. We've made it a big adjustment by putting this wrist angle in here. But what that's going to do is it's going to make it easier to keep the club face open. So let's try one more here. Let's try and get good contact. Really try and keep that nice hinge. Let's try and keep that angle. So go back. Really focus on that rotation and keeping that angle. That's exaggerated, but that's going to help maintain that face angle with a little bit of this radial deviation. Okay, so here we have the shot. So what's interesting here, we brought the launch angle down a little bit. Still rotating, maybe not quite as much because neurologically his focus is now on the wrist, but he's got a little bit more deviation here. So now let's set that. We like that. Let's make that a smart tile. So let's make sure that stays green, and let's see if he can stay in that range. So we've got that, we've got his 6-arm, we're going to set that as his parameters. He had a nice face to path, so what that did do with that wrist angle is that kept the club face open to the path for him, which was pretty consistent. So now let's try one more of those with a little bit more radial. Okay. Here we had definitely got the wrist. He increased that a little bit more. That's great. Again, he's got not much side bend, which is good. That's influencing the direction to the left. We've got the launch angle down, less loft. So he's dragging the club a little bit. That ball started just left of the target, the noodle, and had a big cut to it. So he's almost overdone that. He's exaggerated a little bit too much, but that's great. And that's where you can see in the smart tiles, he's made that change and he's made that adjustment. So that's how you're going to marry up how the pivot works and how the wrist angles work for your desired shot pattern. That's controlling the downswing very much with your pelvis, your torso, and the wrist to get either your fade or your draw.